Hello everyone and welcome to another week in the workshop. Now what we have here is a rather unhappy Mercedes M111 compressor engine. What we're going to be doing today is digging into this engine and working out what manner of terrible things has happened inside of it, and hopefully salvaging one or two good components to use on another engine build I'll introduce a little bit later. So what we have here is a 2.3 litre M111 engine. They come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. And this one is a compressor engine, which means it was built originally with a supercharger. This engine can be found in an SOK 230 or a CLK 230, but this specific one came out of that Mark 1 MX5. So the reason why this engine is no longer in that car is because of one very clumsy mistake. So after finishing that car, nothing's ever really finished, is it? I took the car out for a test drive and I'd set up one parameter ever so slightly wrong in the ECU, which meant I fed over 40 PSI of boost straight into the intake manifold of this stock engine. Now, as you can imagine, something went pop. You can see that the rods are still within the block, which is good news, but cylinder 3 has got almost zero compression. So what we're going to do is begin by taking the head off. We'll have a look, see if we can see anything from there. I'm hoping the head is okay, because I want to use that on a different engine over there. Again, we'll talk about that later on. What I'm expecting to see is some sort of cracked piston or cracked piston ring. It did still run, but it had lots of blow-by and a bit of a misfire. I did manage to drive it home. But yeah, let's see what went wrong. So I believe that these little Merc engines are actually a bit of an unsung hero of the Mercedes family. So a stock 2.3 engine with one or two little mods can make up to 450 horsepower with stock rods, stock pistons, and just a stronger head gasket, which I think is really quite impressive. So with the top engine cover off now, you can see it's a double overhead cam engine. You can see it's been sat for a little while, so there is a bit of pitting on that cam. Yeah, we probably won't be reusing those. We've got some other cams we can use. I've never actually pulled one of these engines down, so this is a bit of learning for me, but I think we've got to take this by the looks of things. Is this a separate front cover? Yes, it is. Right, let's get this front cover off, and then I think we can unbolt the cam gears. Now with my adjustable pry bar, we will simply remove the front cover. Oh yeah. Many things. So with the front cover of this engine off, you can see another little neat thing about these M111 engines. If we look at the intake cam sprocket versus the exhaust cam sprocket, you can see there's a rather big difference, and that is because these engines have variable valve timing on the intake cam. Now what that does is when the engine hits a certain RPM, about 3000, the ECU triggers a little electromagnet on the front of this cover here, which pulls this plunger outwards. That allows oil to flow into this intake cam, which then advances the cam timing by a few degrees. That makes your engine more efficient and more powerful at higher RPMs, but still allows it to run nice and efficient at low RPMs. One little tensioner. We'll take the chain tensioner out as well, so that's bound to help us. Not that. Specifically not like that. Oh yeah. Cool. that's the camshaft out. And we can now look down in here and we can see the hydraulic tappets. Buried down in there are the head bolts. That's the next thing we're going to take off. So I'll whip those head bolts out and then we'll lift the head off. Oh God, they're tight. So there are two more little head bolts underneath here. And to get this chain guide out, we need to take that little pin out. Now these pins have a, am I looking in at all the right place? Oh yeah, I am, yeah. So these pins have little threads in them. So what we're going to do is we've got an M6 bolt here with a socket in it. We've got an M6 bolt here poking through a socket. And we should be able to wind that in. And as we turn that into the thread and the thread tightens, the socket will bottom out against the head and that will pull that little pin out. Let's give it a go. Oh, it's moving. Oh, there you go, that little pin's out. So we can now flick that chain guide over and we can get to that bolt there. So I'll whip those two out and then we'll pull the head off. So I've got the cylinder head off here. What's quite interesting is these little bits. Got no idea where they've come from. But I believe this was our problem cylinder, which is interesting because it's very oily actually. Can't visibly see anything wrong from here, but perhaps we'll have to take the crank out and take the piston out. Have a bit of a further look. Oh, the head gasket seems okay from initial inspection. Let's try and peel this off on it. Whack. Again, nothing too majorly out of order there. I've got the cylinder head over here, so let me move that onto that bench a minute and then we'll have a look at the underside. So at a quick glance, can't see anything majorly wrong. Interestingly, that exhaust valve there, I assume that's an exhaust, yeah, that is an exhaust valve, looks rather oily compared to the other ones. And these ones look like they might have got rather hot. But beyond that, the head does look okay, which is good news. Let's take the bottom end out of that block then. See what the pistons look like. So we've got the engine flipped over and as you can see the sump is now off. We're going to have to take the oil pump off, which is there, and as you can see it's driven by a chain off the front of the crankshaft. We're going to have to take these baffle or windage trays out, which help to separate the crankshaft from the oil that's sitting in the sump and stop the crank, or help to stop the crank from moving through this sort of thick oily air, which can slow it down. Once we've taken that off, we're going to try and leave the crankshaft in the engine. So hopefully all we'll have to do is just take the big ends off of the connecting rods and then we can drop the pistons out at the bottom of the block, because I don't really want to take the crankshaft out if I don't have to, because then that can all go to the scrapyard in one piece. Right then, we can now see the crankshaft, the main timing chain drive, main bearings, main bearing caps at least, and then the bottom of the connecting rod, the big ends here. So what I'm going to do is undo these bolts on here, and then we can push the pistons out the bottom of the block. Next one. So interestingly, I can't actually see anything visually wrong with these pistons. What I'd expect to see is either some sort of hole in them or a crack around one of the ring lands. That's cylinder 1, cylinder 2. Something there? No, nothing there. It all looks rather okay. Now cylinder 3, this is the one that I think had the issue, although it was a year ago now. So perhaps I'm wrong. It does feel like there's something there, but maybe a tiny little crack. Maybe there is a crack there actually. Right. We'll flip the block over and have a look at the bores. Right, so we've got the engine block flipped over here. Let's see, there seems to be a bit of a score mark up through there. Again, nothing too crazy, nothing you wouldn't expect to see, I wouldn't have thought. Back around this one. No, nothing in there either. That bore looks okay. That bore looks okay. And that one looks okay. The only real damage I can find is, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little hairline crack on this piston. So what we're going to do is we'll take the rings off this piston, we'll clean it up, and we'll see if we can see anything more obvious when it's clean. So that little crack I thought I saw is a bit more than a little crack. Now, as we were taught at school, a little crack is okay, but if you have too much crack, bad things will happen. Things will all fall apart. I reckon that right there was our problem. Yeah. I'm glad I found something, because... Oh, look at that. Bloody hell. There's your problem right there. Well, well, well. What do we have here? So as I continue to dig into this piston, I took the oil ring off. You can see we've got another crack ring round here, which is one of these ones. That bit maybe. There are two bits of piston that have fallen off. Now I assume that's caused by detonation, but if you know for certain, please let me know down in the comments. So assuming that issue is caused by detonation, that does make a lot of sense. And that kind of brings us to why we're doing this whole engine strip down, apart from just my pure curiosity. So this is one of the later 2.3 M111 engines, and the later engines were built with a higher compression ratio, which made them a bit more powerful stock, but doesn't make them as suitable for boost, because when you add boost and timing to them, they run into troubles like detonation or pre-ignition. However, what we have over here is one of the older M111 engines. So this is an M111.973, which is a 2.3 litre compressor engine again, but these were built with a lower compression ratio and I believe slightly stronger rods. So the plan for this engine is this will end up in that car over there, which is currently fitted with a 2 litre M111 engine. However, we're going to be taking the head off this engine because you can't make a lot of power with the stock head gaskets. This is only like a fibre one. So we'll be fitting a metal head gasket, and I hope to use this head that we have over here off of this engine. The reason why I want to do that is because the cylinder heads on the later engines were a better design. They had a better flowing intake port, So we're not going to be doing anything with this engine apart from scrapping it, because as we all know, if it weighs, it pays. So we'll get that out onto the rubbish pile and we'll drag this engine over, chuck it on the stand and get the cracking on that one. So we've got the engine up here on the engine crane, and this is the engine that, as I say, will be going in the MX-5. And as you can see, it's a very similar setup. There are some little differences with these older engines. So on the newer engines, you see that's a steel sort of intake horn. The later ones were plastic, so that's an easy way to identify them. They've also got a cast aluminium fuel rail. The later ones had a stainless steel fuel rail. There's some differences with the offset of the supercharger pulley and the main auxiliary pulley. So you'll see that will look different on these older engines. But what we're going to be doing today is we're not going to be using most of the stuff on this block, because we'll transfer it over from that block to this block. So we're going to be stripping a lot of stuff off, like the exhaust manifold, intake manifold, that supercharger bracket. And I'll show you the sort of cylinder head design. We're going to be making up a new aluminium intake manifold for this engine, because this is another limiting factor. So these are plastic intake manifolds. So when you put big amounts of boost into them for long periods of time, they will crack, which is bad news. We're going to make up a nice aluminium one, which hopefully won't crack, but that will be a future project, and that will obviously be made for that head instead of this head. Let's get all this crap stripped off, let's get it on the engine stand, and then I'll show you what I mean about the difference with the head design. Right, well that is as far as we're going to be going with this engine for today. And with the intake manifold off, you can now see that that is a vastly different design to this head over here that's going to be going onto it. So you can see this is almost like a slot with a lump, very technical. And this one over here looks more like a light bulb. So obviously slot with a lump, much better. Okay guys, that's going to do it for this week's episode. I do really think these are greatly underestimated engines, and I hope I can show you and the world what they are capable of. The next time you see this engine, we'll be putting that head back on it. I need to go and get that checked for flatness and that there's no cracks in it. But in the meantime, I'm going to be taking a little trip to the scrapyard to get rid of my nice new pile of metal bits, and that's going to be really helpful, as last week we nearly lost the shop, and that's just the cash injection we need. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next week.